You're walking through a forest. It's somewhere in Africa. The year is irrelevant because years don't exist yet. You're hungry, which is your default state, and you're following your nose towards something sweet. You find it, a cluster of fruit on the ground, overripe, slightly collapsed, smelling like something between nectar and something else you can't name yet. You eat it anyway because you're hungry, and it's there. And the concept of being picky about food is a luxury approximately 99,000 years away from being invented. 20 minutes later, something is different. You feel warm, slightly loose. The low-grade anxiety that is basically the ambient soundtrack of prehistoric life has turned down a notch. The world feels, for the first time in recent memory, genuinely okay. You didn't know it then. You couldn't have, but you just had your first drink. And here's the thing nobody tells you about the history of alcohol. It doesn't start with humans at all. The conventional story goes something like this. Humans figured out fermentation, probably by accident, sometime after the agricultural revolution, around 10,000 BCE. They stored grain. It got wet, wild yeast did what wild yeast does, and someone eventually tasted the result and decided civilization was worth building. Clean narrative, satisfying timeline, almost entirely wrong, because the desire to seek out fermented fruit, to deliberately consume something that alters the chemistry of your brain, is not a human invention. It is an animal inheritance, and we came to it the same way we came to fire, to smoking, to most of the things that define us, not through brilliance, through hunger, accident, and a nervous system that recognized something good when it felt it. Fruit ferments naturally, always has. Wild yeast lives on the skin of fruit, and the moment that fruit falls and begins to break down, fermentation begins. Alcohol appears. Animals who ate that fruit felt the effects, and many of them, across many species, learned to seek it out deliberately. Elephants in Africa have been documented going dramatically out of their way to find and consume fermented marula fruit, not occasionally, regularly, with what can only be described as intent. Pen-tailed tree shrews in Malaysia consume fermented palm nectar every single night and have developed a liver enzyme that processes alcohol at a rate that would hospitalize a human at the same dose. They have been doing this for so long that the adaptation is written into their DNA. Certain birds eat fermented berries, lose coordination, and fly into things. Birds are doing this. The desire to alter consciousness through fermented fruit is not a quirk of human culture. It is a feature of animal neurobiology that predates our species by millions of years, which means when the first anatomically modern human stumbled across fermented fruit on the forest floor, their brain didn't experience something new. Their brain experienced something ancient, a reward signal their nervous system had been wired to respond to long before they were human at all. That's not a footnote. That's the whole story. Now let's talk about what the archaeology actually shows us, because the physical evidence is both older and stranger than most people realize. The oldest chemically confirmed evidence of intentional alcohol production comes from a site called Jiahu in the Henan province of China. Researchers analyzing residue from ceramic vessels found there identified a fermented mixture of rice, honey, hawthorn fruit, and wild grapes dating to approximately 9,000 years ago. 9,000 years. That predates the earliest known wine in the Caucasus region by about 1,000 years and pushes the confirmed timeline of deliberate fermentation deep into the early Neolithic. But here's the thing about Jiahu that almost never gets mentioned. The vessels weren't storage containers. They were ceremonial. The fermented drink wasn't being mass-produced for casual consumption. It was being made for ritual, for ceremony, for the specific purpose of doing something together that altered the collective state of a group. Sound familiar? It should, because we saw exactly the same pattern with smoking, with psychoactive plants, with virtually every substance humans have deliberately consumed across history. The first use is almost never recreational. The first use is sacred. The substance comes wrapped in meaning before it ever gets wrapped in habit. That matters. We'll come back to it. Let's go deeper, because 9,000 years is not actually that old on the human timescale, and there's a compelling argument that intentional alcohol consumption is considerably more ancient than any ceramic vessel could ever prove. Here's the problem with archaeological evidence for ancient drinking. Fermentation leaves almost nothing behind. Organic residue degrades. Wooden vessels rot. Animal skin pouches dissolve back into the earth within centuries. The only reason we know about Jiahu is that they were using ceramic containers, and ceramics survive. But ceramics are a Neolithic technology. Before ceramics, people were using organic materials, wood, bark, skin, leaves shaped into vessels that left no trace whatsoever. This is the same problem we run into with ancient smoking, with ancient medicine, with almost everything soft and organic that ancient people did. The absence of physical evidence is not evidence of absence. It is evidence that organic matter decomposes, and archaeologists have limited superpowers. What we can say with more confidence is that the cognitive and behavioral preconditions for intentional fermentation were present in humans long before the Neolithic. Understanding cause and effect, noticing that stored fruit changed over time, remembering that something felt different after eating it, deliberately recreating those conditions. These are not advanced cognitive operations. These are basic pattern recognition functions that Homo sapiens had fully developed for at least 100,000 years before anyone made a clay pot. The honest answer to when ancient humans started drinking intentionally is probably much earlier than 9000 BCE, possibly far, far earlier. We just can't prove it yet. Now here's where it gets genuinely interesting, because there is a theory, taken seriously by respected researchers, that alcohol didn't just happen to humans. Alcohol may have actively shaped us. Patrick McGovern, a biomolecular archaeologist at the University of Pennsylvania, who has spent his career chemically analyzing ancient vessels for traces of fermented beverages, has argued that the desire to ferment things may have been one of the drivers of the agricultural revolution itself. The standard story is that humans settled down, started farming grain, and then discovered you could make beer from the excess. McGovern and others have flipped this. What if the desire to reliably produce fermented grain beverages was one of the motivations that made settling down attractive in the first place? What if the village came before the bread and beer came before both? This is called the beer before bread hypothesis, and it is not fringe speculation. It is a legitimate ongoing debate in archaeology. The evidence is genuinely ambiguous. The earliest cultivated grain sites show evidence of both food and fermentation use, and it is not at all clear which came first or which was the primary driver. But the fact that the question is even serious should rattle your assumptions about what built civilization. We built cities, agricultural systems, division of labor, writing, trade routes, and the entire scaffolding of human civilization. And somewhere in that origin story, some researchers believe, is a fermented grain drink that tasted bad by modern standards and changed everything. Let's talk about what alcohol actually did for ancient human communities, because the answer is more complicated than we're usually comfortable admitting. Modern conversation about alcohol tends to oscillate between two poles. It's either a recreational pleasure we're slightly guilty about, or a public health crisis we should take more seriously. Both of those framings are real. Neither of them captures what alcohol has been for most of human history, which is a social technology of extraordinary power. Shared consumption of alcohol synchronizes groups in measurable ways. It lowers social inhibition, which in small doses means people share more, trust faster, and feel more connected to the people around them. It reduces status anxiety, flattening hierarchies temporarily in ways that allow honest communication across social rank. It creates shared vulnerability. Everyone in the circle is in the same altered state, which builds a specific kind of trust that is very difficult to generate any other way. Robin Dunbar, the anthropologist famous for theorizing the cognitive limits of human social groups, has actually studied alcohol's role in social bonding specifically. His research found that people who drink together in groups report higher levels of social trust, feel closer to the people they drank with, and have stronger feelings of group belonging than people who socialize without alcohol. The bond formed over shared altered states is measurably real. For ancient communities where group cohesion was the difference between survival and death, where trust between individuals had direct consequences for who would help you in a crisis, where the social fabric needed constant maintenance and reinforcement, alcohol was not a frivolity hospitality. It was infrastructure. It was technology. It was doing real and important work. The ritual drink wasn't just a reward at the end of a hard day. It was the mechanism by which a group of 50 people reminded themselves that they were a group. There's a specific piece of this story that almost never gets told, and it involves yeast. Yeast is a single-celled fungus that exists everywhere, on fruit skin, in the air, in the soil, on your hands right now. And yeast, when it encounters sugar in the absence of oxygen, does one thing. It eats the sugar and produces two byproducts, carbon dioxide and ethanol, alcohol. Yeast has been doing this for approximately 80 million years. It was fermenting things before flowering plants had fully diversified, before mammals existed, before the asteroid that ended the dinosaurs. Yeast has been making alcohol on this planet for longer than there have been animals capable of drinking it, which means that when the first ancient human tasted fermented fruit, they weren't encountering something humans made. They were encountering something the planet had been making for 80 million years, waiting in a sense for a nervous system complex enough to appreciate it. There's something almost vertiginous about that if you sit with it long enough. Here's the uncomfortable part of the story, the part that earns its place by being honest. The same social technology that built trust in ancient communities is also the thing that, scaled up and industrialized and stripped of ritual context, became one of the most destructive forces in modern human life. Alcohol-related harm, addiction, disease, violence, the wreckage it leaves in families and communities. These are not small footnotes. They are the other side of the same coin. The difference, as with smoking, as with virtually every substance humans have ritualized throughout history, is context, is meaning, is the difference between a substance held within a structure of community, moderation, and purpose, and a substance mass-produced, aggressively marketed, and consumed in isolation. A shaman offering fermented drink at a ceremony to bind a community together, and a liquor company spending billions to sell solitary drinking as a personality were both working with ethanol. They had almost nothing else in common. So when did ancient humans start drinking alcohol? Accidentally, probably before they were fully human. Intentionally, almost certainly before they had ceramics to prove it. Ritually, at least 9,000 years ago with hard evidence, and almost certainly much earlier with reasonable inference. But the more interesting answer is this: they started drinking alcohol the moment they had nervous systems complex enough to feel what it did, and what it did, in the right dose, in the right context, with the right people around the same fire, was make them feel less alone. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, almost everything. We have rooftop bars and wine fridges and craft breweries and cocktail menus 6 pages long. We have the most sophisticated delivery systems for ethanol in human history. And what most people are still chasing, underneath all of it, is the same thing a person on the African savanna felt the first time they ate fermented fruit off the ground, and turned to the person next to them and felt, without words for it, that everything was going to be okay. Some things don't change, they just get fancier.